it seems to me the mining companies are very destructive because you see the great big holes they leave. I wondered if they ever covered them up. And I would like to ask Frank, what is the effect on the environment of 150,000 drilled wells? Do you know what that would be?
Well, that's two questions. So firstly, what do you do with the holes?
Yeah, look, they do leave a scar, but we do also do quite a bit of rehabilitation. It's part of the government's licensing arrangements for mining. Certainly, if I look at the areas around Latrobe Valley, and if I use Loy Yang, the one where I was deeply involved, basically the mine itself is not visible to people from outside, and we certainly rehabilitate and try and bring it back to natural structures, including filling in areas and making them part of the normal surrounds.
I said 1,500 wells, not 150,000.
I thought you said 100.
1,500. The point is...
1,500, not...
1,500. The point is that they are in Bass Strait, so they're under the water. They're not on land. Furthermore, when a well is dry, or the proponent that's drilled the well effectively has to pay a bond to the government, and that's held until they seal the well according to what is considered best practice. So each well that's drilled, not all of them discover oil or gas, but if they're so-called dry wells, then they again have to be sealed and so on. So there is a protocol in place.
Thanks, John, local resident. One of the things that we haven't really discussed at all is the cost. So I'm just wondering if there's any comments on the differential in cost. I think they're all wonderful ideas. We need a bigger mix potentially, but we don't want to do it at any cost because we're already seeing manufacturing going out of business, and my back pocket hurts when my power bill comes. But we've relied on the low-cost brown coal, but what about the cost of these others, and how is that impacting in the future?
Yeah, renewables to date are costing more in many cases. Certainly wind is at a premium to brown coal, and solar is even higher. However, in the overall mix, that's not having much impact on your back pocket right now because of the percentages are so low. As an example, the wind input in South Australia is actually depressing prices for a variety of reasons. So their costs have actually come down in South Australia. And that could happen in other states as well. But you have to realize that there's been a long-term investment in coal in this state for a very long time that we've all paid for. And now with new sources of energy, they're higher cost. They're generally always higher when you start introducing new technology and new resources.
I don't disagree with any of that. New technologies are always more costly to start with, and they do come down as time goes by and you get more efficient at it. But you're also going to see more efficiencies come from the old plant as well. And so we need to keep driving on both of those.
Yep, Mary, then Andrew.
Yeah, just a quick point. I think it's important that we don't pick technology winners, so it's got to be a large part of the consideration as a market-based approach. At the moment, coal-based generated electricity is the cheapest. By 2050, with changing of regulatory and pricing mechanisms, it will bring down the cost of other technologies.
Yeah, okay. Andrew, the cost of biomass.
Not really. The Department of Energy in the US has a what they call a levelised cost of all the energy sources, and it's on Wikipedia among other things, or you might be able to get direct. And it talks about coal with carbon capture and storage, or gas closed cycle turbines with carbon capture and storage, wind, solar, etc., including solar concentrating thermal power tower or other sorts of concentrating thermal to electricity. And out of those, generally speaking, wind, onshore wind, bioenergy from woody biomass at scale, like 20 megawatt electric, and the closed cycle or new coal-fired power stations with carbon capture and storage are all very similar. And then you jump up a bit to solar concentrating thermal, and then up a little bit more to solar PV. So, and part of the issue is the fact that they're intermittent or not on demand. So it's very interesting to see this levelised cost, because that's covering the capital cost and the operating and maintenance costs all in one package.
So, very simple answer.
Question, I think, probably for Ian. You mentioned the intermittency issue. We produce a lot of natural gas, and we're seeing the same trend that you mentioned, that we used to see a big seasonal demand, and that's now flattening. We're seeing demand increase throughout the year. To what extent, when you do have to operate a brown coal power station at that base load, how flexible are you to bring in these renewables? I mean, do they actually reduce emissions when they come online?
Yeah, good question. Brown coal plant is something that doesn't start or stop real quickly. We can certainly turn it down if we look at some of the more modern plants. Certainly we could cut the output to say about half of its nominated rate and increase that again quite rapidly. If we have to actually close a piece of plant down and it's closed down for say 3 or 4 days, it'll take 2 or 3 days to bring back up, depending on its current state or whether we've kept it running. So we've got some of it that can move around, not great amounts, and certainly if we don't run at full load, it is less efficient. So therefore you produce more CO2 per megawatt hour produced. So the most efficient way to run the plant is flat out.
Graham.
I think we have to realise that for every kilowatt hour injected from renewable energy, that displaces a kilowatt hour from fossil fuels. And there's no doubt about that. The efficiency is an issue to the fossil fuel plants. They become more inefficient as they go down, as you've said. But remember, every kilowatt hour is displacing a kilowatt. You do not produce another kilowatt hour if it's been produced by another source.
So I guess it's really how you work out the relative values of those two things, isn't it?
Yes, well, the market does that, and
Yeah.
it's working very well in South Australia, where 25% of the energy is from wind.
Yeah.
My question is not about Gippsland, but carbon capture is possibly viable in Victoria. But what is the situation if we export vast amount of fossil fuels vis-a-vis atmospheric carbon dioxide?
I just have a personal view. I don't see us exporting any of these processed products, if you like, from brown coal without having a solution to capture and store the carbon dioxide. My own personal view is that in order to get a social license to operate from community, we will have to have the robust technology that we can convince the community that we can capture and store the carbon dioxide. And as I said, that's the major, I think to me that's the biggest game in town vis-a-vis brown coal at this point in time. And it's the reason that state and federal government have put $100 million on the table. So yes, there are prospects to make chemicals from coal, make liquid fuels from coal, upgrade the coal and export more briquettes or equivalent. But my own personal view is we will need to solve this other problem first.
Back to the energy white paper again, and it's online. The federal government is looking at tripling our exports of fossil fuels, LPG, coal seam gas, various sorts of coal, plus uranium. And so if we're selling the technology for carbon capture and storage, that's terrific. And there are a few other people, the Indians and the Norwegians, are working on carbon capture and storage as well, and no one seems to be doing it in practice, and no one's saying it's going to be happening within 10 or 15 years. And so it is the question, if we're talking about trying to keep average global temperatures to a rise of no more than 2 degrees, that's the kicker. And if we go past that and spin off into a 4, 5, 6 degree rise by 2050, and I'm sure you'll have a point about this because it's not my particular area, but it's what happens to be circulating around in the media at the moment, then we have a responsibility.
Just to take up your point on the capping the 2% rise in global emissions, the International Energy Agency have said to be able to achieve that, carbon capture and storage has to be part of that mix. We've got significant projects in Australia, one here in Gippsland. There's a lot of intellectual property at an international level being shared on making that technology work, and I think to pick up the gentleman from Foster's point, absolutely agree that we've got to invest and get that technology to a commercially viable stage. And for anyone that hasn't been to Foster, it's an absolutely magnificent place.
I think the other thing that's worth just putting on the table as well is that while I agree that we need to be part of those new technologies, and the carbon capture storage issue is an intimate part of the future, it's not one that Australia can take on alone. If we look at where we sit with the production of carbon from the electricity generation sector, it's less than 0.5% of the world's emissions. So we will not solve it on our own, but we do need to be there and part of that process.
In Australia, we do have a cooperative research centre called the CO2 CRC, and it's headquartered at my university in Melbourne. But the point I want to make is that in the Otways, there's already an experiment being conducted where 66,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide has been injected into an old reservoir, and in fact why that's been done is to develop and refine the expertise to monitor the migration and so on of it. So an important element here is once it's injected, the community is going to say, how confident are you that in fact it's going to actually stay there? And so we already have a project nationwide being watched by the world to demonstrate we have the capacity to monitor what happens to that carbon dioxide once it's stored.
I've got a question specifically aimed at Andrew. Thank you for the information on biomass, that was really interesting. But my question is tonight more about CSG. We've been talking a lot about renewable energies. I'm interested in your thoughts on what you think CSG is in terms of a new energy for Australia, and where you could see that as a farmer yourself coexisting with farming in Australia.
I have to say it's anathema to me, and I would hate to see wellheads all over our property. That being said, we've got, the heads of old water bores here and there, and I guess it's what you get used to.
And it'd keep the windmills off.
And I was going to say, there's nothing more noisy than some of our little windmills clacking around empty, with a missing vane or two. But and no one seems to get a headache about that. But I have been following the media actually about the leakage of methane from wellheads and that sort of thing, and obviously people pick it up and make a bigger thing out of it than maybe it really supports. But it's very interesting to see who is driving that whole industry. And when big money starts to move things along, and with the World Bioenergy Association, I'm looking at this international movement of biomass as well. When big money starts to move things along, little people get trampled, and they have to get together, but they have to do it very sensibly and intelligently and use the laws and all that sort of thing. But there's no substitute for getting prepared and getting united and getting all your facts together. So I feel for anybody who has the coal seam gas people turning up at the front gate.
My question is, given that the CO2's already sequestered, what's the real reason that we aren't investing in the R&D dollars in renewables instead of CO2 sequestration?
Again, this is just a personal view, but I think incumbent industries and technologies have the upper hand in policy decision making. They've got the money flowing through them, they've got the employment, and they've got the ear of government. And if you're starting off with a new technology basically from zero, it's very hard to get the attention of decision makers. And it takes a very, very long time until the new technology actually becomes mainstream.
Look, I think part of the issue here is that we have a major natural resource that can't be forgotten either. I think James said there's 100 years. It's about 700 years worth of coal that sits under the valley at the moment at its current usage rate. It's not a matter of just digging it up and using it as we do now. It's a matter of doing it in a more efficient way and a way which is actually sustainable. It can't be just left there. The renewables bit is part of it. Well, I think it's part of our economy. It's part of how we're actually going to continue to develop. And if we don't do that, then you need to start to think about whether or not our communities will in fact survive as they are. And in fact, if we can put something else in place that is as efficient, and if it can in fact still compete on the overseas markets that we're a fundamental part of.
Well, isn't the answer is it will stay there, but only if a viable alternative gets to the point where it can compete with it, really. What do you want to say about that question of resource allocation, really, between traditional and new sources of energy?
Well, I think there are 2 points. One is that historically brown coal is really underpinned the economy in Victoria, and that's why it's the manufacturing state. That's why the quality of life in Victoria is so high. We face the prospect, as people indicating, of moving away from extensive use of brown coal, but we, at the moment, as you heard in the introduction, more than 90% of our electricity comes from brown coal. It is a transition that will take place. That transition, there are power stations operating today that will still be operating in 2030, 2040. The point I was making is that if they're going to operate, we better do something about the carbon dioxide as well. Yes, other renewables will come in, possibly other geothermal may come in, possibly even ocean power, but they are not going to come in mainstream before, at the earliest, probably 2035. So we've got the reality that in fact we're going to have to live with coal for a significant period of time, but let's do it more environmentally friendly, more sustainable, and yes, ultimately we might phase it out, but we're not going to phase it out in the next 10 years. I think that's really the reality we have to face up to.
But the other thing is that we have to realise, I mean, we've been talking about electricity almost entirely, and electricity is only about 25 to 30% of our energy. The other 30%, or another 30% at least, is fuels, which we're importing more and more of, and again, the white paper's interesting about that. It's basically saying, let's keep importing more and more of. Let's not worry about national resource security, because it's too complicated. And the other 30 or 40% is heat, and heat is the low-hanging fruit. We've got 6,000-7,000 megawatt of generating power here, but that means that we've got at 25-30%, maybe 30% efficiency of conversion to electricity. The rest of that energy is going off as wasted heat, evaporating a lot of drinking quality water as it goes. And so there is a real problem there in allocation of resources, and it's as you're saying, if we let our railway systems run down, and if we dismember the CSIRO and the CRC for forestry through successive government flip-flopping and not maintaining a coherent policy direction and just going with the sort of green pressure with solar and wind maybe, then we've only got ourselves to blame, and we're in this mess because there hasn't been a decent long-term policy, and it's worth going offshore to even New Zealand to see what happens when you do have a decent policy.
And in light of Ted Baillieu's comment earlier this year about Gippsland could potentially be Australia's next Pilbara, with that attitude and the fact that he and his government are in bed with the coal industry, what realistic chance, and I do stress the word realistic chance, do we have in this state of progressing the development of renewable energy sources for our energy needs? Given the fact that instead of just sitting back and relying on the dirty coal industry because it's there, it's easy, and it's cheap.
Yeah, Graham?
Well, I think that the policy changes by the current state government really tell where we're going in the future. Certainly the feed-in tariff for solar has been abolished, and therefore there's going to be very little incentive to install solar the way it's been in the past. Also, the restrictions on wind farms are such that there's going to be very little development for future projects. So I think those two particular resources are going to be locked out of the state until there's some changes made in policy.
Anyone else on that? Yep.
Yeah, just if I make a point or clear up a point, I haven't said that you mine it at any cost. The issue is that we need to continue to actually develop the technologies to be able to mine that resource and to get the best use of it. So continuation, I said right at the very beginning, is going to see changes to what we do, changes in the technologies, changes in the education, etc. I take that as a given to be able to achieve that.
So it doesn't matter what form of electricity we're going to generate from your panel up there, it will most likely happen on my farm or our farms. Now, given that we do want to double our food production, however, if we are now producing 90% of the state's power, and I don't know what energy levels, but as this state is so rich so this region is so rich in resources, and why can't we continue to aim at producing that mix, just exactly what Andrew says, and become the centre for all these technologies? Why don't we give them all a go and see if we can achieve the targets that all of us want?
What a wonderful thought to end on, a plan for the future, to embrace them all, see what works and what doesn't work. Any thoughts on that from anyone?
The one we haven't talked about at all tonight is geothermal. And again, that is in my basket. Geothermal is in the mix, but again, it's not yet proven. There is suggestion that the hot saline aquifers under the brown coal seams here in the Latrobe Valley may be very prospective, but we don't know yet. And we again, it's like the coal bed methane, we just don't know enough information. So if you distill it down, the fundamental concern that I have is sustaining baseload power. If we move rapidly away from coal, where else in Victoria will we generate at an economically competitive price baseload power? Yes, in 20 years' time we might do it because the cost curves are coming down. But in that time frame, I just don't see an option. So I think we're all saying we should go forward with a range of technologies, but in fact finding an alternative, economically competitive baseload power source, again, is a really big challenge for Victoria.
Look, I think the comments about trying to progress as many of these technologies as we can is certainly one of worthy of comment. Unfortunately, we don't have sufficient funds to be able to dive into that, to put them all together, particularly to get to a point where they're actually at a commercial scale. We can do it at probably the R&D side, we can do it up to maybe even a pilot plant. But if you actually try and take that through to the next stage, essentially each project would need about $1 billion to even get anywhere underway. And Australia is not in a position, let alone Victoria, to be able to progress those through and maintain our economy, unfortunately.
I just have to disagree with the last two speakers. I was hoping we'd get to a dog and cat fight right at the end. Basically, it is possible. We can move into these sort of areas, and heat is one of the things. Ballarat, where I'm spending some of my time, in 2014 is starting to develop an employment zone, 250 hectares. It's designed to attract new industries to supply about 9,000 jobs. In the centre of that could be a 35, 40 megawatt heat plant providing heat from biomass to those industries. Built over 6 to 9 months, costing something in $25, $30 million, supplying zero emission, low emission heat using available biomass from the area. We know it's there, we've done the study, and it is no problem. The biomass is there, the technology's there, it's available off the shelf, we can buy it from half a dozen different suppliers. You guys here could be doing the same thing. It's not necessarily talking about electricity, but it's no problem to bolt on an organic Rankine cycle system, producing electricity out of the heat in summer, if only in summer, of something in the order of 2-3 megawatts. So it's easy. It's just a matter of the money and who supplies the money. And the city wants to attract these industries. The city is spending something in the order of $6 million a year on landfill levy. So withdrawing that material out of the landfill, putting some of it into anaerobic digestion, some of it into these other sorts of energy are part of what